Hello everyone and welcome to another game you guys requested from the Meltwater Champions Chester Finals. It is the second game of the match, Magnus Carlsen versus Praggnanandhaa. The first game was won by Magnus. If you've seen the previous video, you know how that happened. Pragg tried to sacrifice for the attack, but Magnus found one way that he could not only survive the attack but also win the game after he defended well. And now this is the second game. Again, it's fairly similar. Magnus will try to simplify things. Pragg will try to keep it complicated. He will try to attack, but what's really awesome about this game is that it follows exactly not move by move, because it actually transposes into that position later on in the game. Game 8 of the World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin, that Karyakin won very nicely as Magnus blundered terribly in the end game. So we'll see what Magnus prepared, if he even prepared something, because of course that's one of the games that I believe Magnus analyzed more than any in his life. It is the one game that he actually lost in a World Chess Championship match. So let's see how they play it out. Pawn to b3. This is what Magnus goes for here. This is the Nimzovich-Larsen attack. And like I said, we will transpose into that game. Pawn to d5, a very principled reply. Pragg grabs the center. We have bishop to b2, controlling the center with the pieces. And now knight to f6. We have knight to f3 and c5. So this is very nicely done by Pragg. e3, and now pawn to e6. We have pawn to d4 and bishop to d6. D captures on c5, making the bishop waste the tempo. Bishop captures on c5, and now pawn to c4, challenging black center here. Castles, and now knight b to d2. We have queen to e7, and now a3. We have pawn to a5, and bishop to d3. D captures on c4, knight captures on c4, and now bishop b6, preparing to develop the light square bishop. Castles, and now knight b to d7. We have knight to d4 by Magnus, and here Pragg plays bishop to b7, and this is the position from game 8 of the World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin. Magnus also had the white pieces there, and in that game Magnus played queen to e2. It's not the move that lost him the game, but probably he's not very fond of it. So here he goes bishop to e2, which is the first and absolute strongest move recommended by the engine. So we know that Magnus has looked into that game, but probably Pragg has as well. Knight to e4 now, bringing the knight to this wonderful e4 square, also freeing up the f6 square for the other knight, which will just improve the well, just black's pieces. Bishop to f3. Now Magnus wants to counter Pragg's a very strong light square bishop on b7, and knight d to f6. We have queen to c2, putting pressure on e4, but Pragg has very nice control over the e4 square. Rook 8 to c8, aligning the rook nicely with the queen here, and pawn to a4, stopping any future b5 ideas. And here we have bishop to d5. Not sure if this formation has a name or anything, but it definitely should have a name. We have rook 8 to c1, h6, and now queen to e2, getting the queen out of that rook's c file. Rook f to d8, and now rook f to d1. And look at this, it's like they are composing this together. Such a nice position to see. Knight to h7. Pragg now wants to improve the position of this knight as well. He wants to come to g5, put pressure on the f3 bishop. Bishop captures on e4. Magnus gives up the bishop pair. Bishop captures, and now knight to b5, offering a trade of rooks along the d file. Queen to g5. Pragg says thank you very much, I'm gonna go for checkmate here. f3, blocking checkmate, and now rook captures on d1. You can't capture on e3, the knight defends the e3 square, but Pragg has a way of trying to get to that square. So rook captures on d1, rook captures, and now bishop to d5, threatening to remove the defender of the e3 pawn, and then just pick up the pawn. So bishop to d4, Magnus has to block this. Bishop captures on d4, e captures on d4, and now Pragg has to make a very important decision. The b6 pawn is hanging. Does he want to defend it with with something like queen to d8. It does bring the queen back to the starting square, and Pragg really wants to move forward, not go backwards, so he goes knight to f6. He sacrifices the pawn, and now he wants to bring the knight to h5 to f4, and then just checkmate Magnus. And Magnus says, all right, let's see what you got. So knight captures on b6. We have rook to c1, now offering a trade of rooks, and Magnus just goes back. Knight to c4. Now, no longer is bishop captures on b3 an option, and he is attacking the a5 pawn as well. Now, it's interesting, in the previous game as well, Pragg sacrificed for the attack, and we said that if Magnus is able to fend off the attack, he will just be winning because of the passed pawns. And here also, he has a 2-to-1 advantage on the queen side. If he can start pushing those pawns, should be very good for him. Knight to h5, rook captures on c1, queen captures on c1 with check, king to f2, and now just bishop captures on c4. We have queen captures on c4, offering a queen trade, but now queen to b2 check. Pragg not interested in a queen trade. King to e3, and now queen captures on g2. So Pragg was down a pawn, but now he wins back his pawn, and well, he's just better here. Magnus's king is in a really bad position, and the queen and knight, like we said, make a great attacking combo. d5 by Magnus. We have queen to g1 with check, king to d3, and now queen to d1 with check. Best was to capture on h2, because it doesn't really give white all that many options. If you capture here, first knight to f4 check, the queen now covers the f4 square, and once the king moves, you're gonna pick up the e6 pawn. And now, okay, white does have some play, but black should be better. Hard to say if black can win this, but black will be much better. But in the game, queen to d1 check was played, king to e3, and now queen to e1 check, king to d3, now queen to b1 check, and now Magnus plays king to d2, and he says now you are no longer able to win this because well, there's just no good way to play this. If you play queen to b2 check, I'm just gonna move the king, and this is, well, if Pragg wants, he can just force a draw, queen b1, queen b2, queen b1, queen b2, or even he can go for something like this, and then maybe even capture the h2 pawn, but then the d6 pawn starts marching forward, which is also very dangerous. Still, it will be enough for him to get a draw. But in the game, after king to d2, e captures on d5 was played, and now there is a problem in the position. The position is now completely winning for Magnus. There's a problem in the position for Pragg, so feel free to pause the video here and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this dirty trick. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to c8 check. The only move that wins forces king to h7. This is the only move for black, king to h7, and now you force a queen trade. Queen to c2 with check, queen captures, and king captures. So that was the secret weapon, and it's very easy to solve positions like these and play chess as well as Magnus does if you can just imagine queens off the board and you figure out, okay, this is a completely winning position for me. And I'm sure you guys know why it's a completely winning position for white, but okay, I could give you a pause the video moment because I really know all of you know how to solve this. Pragg played king to g6, and now, for the second time, feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on, well, always trying that first. It's the strongest move in every game, and so it is the strongest move in this game, and of course that is pawn to b4. So congratulations to everyone who found this, as I'm pretty sure no one just enjoyed the show on this one. Pawn to b4 wins the game. There's nothing you can do about it. It will create a passed pawn, or if a captures on b4, what Pragg played, then pawn to a5. And now, luckily, Pragg's knight from h5 can still catch up to the pawn. Knight to f6, a6, knight to d7, a7, and knight to b6. So the a8 square, the queening square is guarded, but now Magnus brings the king into the game. King b6, king f6, sorry, king b3, king f6, king captures on b4, knight to a8 now, king to c5, king to e7, and now king to c6. We have king to d8, and now king to b7. And here, Pragg just plays king to f6. He offers Magnus a full knight, and if Magnus captures, Pragg will just trap his king like this. And okay, the position is still winning for Magnus, but Magnus doesn't want to mess around like this. He just goes back, king to c6. He doesn't want the free knight. h5. And now king captures on d5. King to d7, we have king to c5, and now pawn to g5. Pragg starts advancing his pawns. King to d5, now pawn to g4. Captures, and now king to e4. We have king to c6, now knight to c3. We have king to b7, and now king to f5. And interestingly, it's now possible to save the game for Pragg. It's an extremely difficult move to find. Pragg didn't find it in the game, but luckily you guys are here, and I will make this the third pause the video moment because the game is so complicated. Like I mentioned in the previous video, whenever Magnus and Pragg play, they play games that are so complicated, you have a chance to make a mistake on pretty much every move. So feel free to pause the video for the third time and try and save this game for Pragg while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as you are a true master of incredibly difficult endgames. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is pawn to g3. Such a silly move to play, yes, because the king will capture the g4 pawn, and that's what Pragg thought. That's why he didn't go for it in the game. He played knight to c7, and then he allowed king captures on g4. But with pawn to g3, you force h captures on g3. And now after h captures on g3, now you play knight to b6. And now check this out. King captures on f6. King captures on a7, g4. It seems like your pawn is unstoppable, but that could not be further from the truth. King to b7. Look at this. King g5, knight to d7 check, and now you don't have a good square for your king. And this is something that you should remember, as you might just resign in a game in a position like this, but here it's actually impossible to win because Magnus can always, or rather Pragg can always sacrifice this knight for a pawn. If you go king to e7, knight e5, and the g6 square is covered. If you go back, king f6, knight e7 check. If you try king f7, knight to e5 check. If you try king to e6, then you block the pawn, knight to g6. If you bring the knight into the game, just knight h4, and you are never crossing that g6 square because the knight will just capture it. If king f6, you're just going to play king to c6. If g6, you're just going to capture it, king captures, and that's it. Even if you save the knight, it doesn't really matter. You can move the knight. Let's say you play the knight gives check, king to d7, you bring the knight somewhere, you bring the knight over here, just king to d8. And again, there's no way for you to actually cross the g6 square, and that's how you save this. It's pretty tough to spot from here, but I mean, it's hard. In a classical game, of course, everyone finds this. By everyone, I mean players who are playing this, both Magnus and Pragg would find this, but in a rapid game with less than a minute on the clock, not so much. Knight to c7 was played, and now Magnus just gobbles up the g4 pawn. Knight to e6, we have king to f5, knight to d4 check, and king to e4. He just wants to start advancing his past h-pawn, knight to e6, and pawn to h4. We have knight to g7, knight to b5 now, guarding the pawn, because you could have captured the pawn, but then the pawn would just march forward much faster. This way, Pragg created a barricade here, so the white king cannot get across, but now, of course, Magnus had time to save the pawn with knight to b5. King to a8, we have king to f4. We have king to b7, now Pragg is forced to just move the king back and forth. King g4, king to a8, and now knight to d6. Again, if you try h5 here, it's not going to work because just knight captures on h5. King captures on f5. This is a draw, a different kind of a draw, but a draw. I will show it because I know you guys might be interested. King b7, and there's no way to kick away the black king from the corner. King to e5, king to a8. You're just going to bring your king closer, and now after king c5 and king here, you cannot put the king to b6 because it's stalemate, and if you try to go around, let's say king b7, king a5, king here, you still can't put the king here or here because it's against stalemate. You will take away the b7 square from the black king, so this will again be a draw. It would be ideal if you could have your pawn defended by the king and then deliver a check with the knight, but that's not happening. So luckily Magnus did not play this. He goes knight to d6. We have king captures on a7, knight to f5, now offering a trade of knights, and that of course would be winning for Magnus. Knight e6 and only now h5. So you can see how much preparation took into advancing the pawn just to that h5 square. King to b6, h6, we have knight to f8 guarding the h7 square, but now knight to d4. Very tricky stuff. It prevents king c5 because knight e6 check, forces knight to capture, and then h7 is unstoppable. And aside from that, you don't really have much. Knight h7 was played, king f5, king to c5, and now king g6. Magnus offers the knight here for the knight on h7. So knight g5, and now just king captures on f6. Knight h7 check, king g6, knight to f8 check, king g7, and he was in this position on move 74 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once the knight moves, knight to d7, you're just going to play, okay, you can even save the knight, knight f3, then h7, h8. There's no way for the knight to actually stir some trouble here. So yeah, after king to g7, he resigned, and Magnus wins his second game in a row, and the third game between the two of them ended in a draw, which means Magnus wins the match, which means that Magnus wins the Meltwater Champions Chester Finals, a full round before the tournament finishes. Even though we said that as Duda was playing incredibly well in the tournament, that he will probably face Duda in the final round, and that could decide the outcome of the tournament. Now that match will have no significance whatsoever on the outcome of the tournament, as Magnus wins just a full round ahead. These are the standings, if you guys are interested, before the final round starts. So Magnus in first place with 17 points. Incredible stuff. Wesley Stowe in second with 12, then Duda in third with 10, Arjun Irgaisi, Liam Leh, Shahrir Mamedjarov, Praggnanandhaa, and Anish Giri last with 4 points. Tough tournament for Anish here. But yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely played by Magnus. I mean, this is truly an outstanding performance, but like it's like he said in a tournament, in an interview yesterday, they asked him, does he feel that he should win more games now that he basically resigned his World Chess Championship title without fighting for it? He said most definitely yes, that he wants to win absolutely everything, and he just wants to win every tournament, every game. That is what motivates him. That is what drives him. We'll see if, how long that will be possible. Hopefully for a very long time. So yeah, that's the game. Really hope you guys enjoyed it and that you've learned something about the end game. The entire game was incredibly complicated, just throughout the game, and then especially the end game. I mean, that would be tough to play in a classical game, let alone in a rapid. So yeah, once again, really hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Luke Bostian, and I would like to thank Francis Air, Carmen Polifronio, Sinister Pawn, and Ravishing Reptiles YouTube for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event and whatever you guys think I should show or maybe suggest, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.